Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's Talkin' Water. My name is Justin Dyke, and I am TBWD's Communications and Public Affairs Supervisor. We're pleased that you're able to spend some of your afternoon with us today to talk about our water rates proposal. And we are going to be discussing kind of a lot of content in our time slot today. So I'll just warn you all in advance, we might seem as if we're going to move fairly quickly through the slides today. That's only because we want to have ample opportunities for everyone to ask their questions within the regular 1 hour time slot. And if questions do continue on past that time, we will continue on for the Q&A afterwards. So a couple reminders on how our virtual open houses and our Talkin' Water events go. These sessions are recorded. They'll be posted on our YouTube channel this afternoon, and they'll be linked to our tvwd.org/rates page once we get it up there. Please make sure your microphone is muted. And as a reminder, we will have a moderated Q&A after the presentation, but at any time, if you have a question about the content, please type it into the Q&A. You'll see on the menu bar there, there's a red circle on the right side. That's where the Q&A function can be found across the top of your screen. You can click there and type in your questions at any time. We'll get to them in the order that they're received after the presentation. And as well, once we get to the Q&A, we can call on you to unmute and ask your question in real time. We ask that folks that want to use that function in the Q&A use the raise hand function on the left circle there at the top bar once we get to it. Again, these are all at the top bar. And we do have another feature. If you have accessibility needs, just under the bottom left corner of the slide, you'll see a 3-dot ellipsis there. If you click on that, that's where you can then enable slide magnification or translate the slides or change the color contrast and view settings. Those are all for changing just for your view individually. They won't affect the entire presentation, but they are there to help you have a better viewing experience. And as always, we operate in an inclusive and a discrimination-free manner to serve our customers, so staff may exclude participants who are disruptive or are abusive in any nature. So just a quick recap on where we're at with our public outreach efforts for the 2023 rate cycle. We're all the way at the beginning right now with our first of three open houses, I should say. One will be in person. So you're joining us today on the 2nd here at noon. There'll be an in-person open house this Saturday at our headquarters. And then August 16th, we will have a regular board meeting and a public hearing on our rates where our Board of Commissioners can and will receive public comment as well. And then we'll wrap up with a final virtual Talkin' Water on the rates on Thursday, the 17th. And as a reminder, official public comments, the close of public comment period, I should say, is on August 24th at 4 p.m. So if you have comments on the rates, please submit them before the 24th at 4 p.m. And today's presenters are going to be our CEO, Tom Hickmann, our Willamette Water Supply Program Director, Dave Kraska, and our Chief Financial Officer, Paul Matthews. They'll be each sharing a portion of the slides today, and you'll be hearing from them, and they'll be available in the Q&A to answer your questions afterwards. So without further ado, I want to introduce our CEO, Tom Hickmann, who is going to lead us through the next series of slides. Take it away, Tom.
Thank you, Justin. And again, thank you to everyone who's joining us. There's a quick overview of my background. I'm not going to spend much time on that, but overall, my job here is to oversee all aspects of the district to make sure that we are utilizing all of our resources as efficiently as possible. So let's get right into this. What's driving rates? That is, I'm sure, everybody's burning question. So you're going to hear later on in this presentation some of the details about the Willamette water supply, but in short, the project costs on that project have gone up significantly, and we are carrying the burden of that cost. We are working with our partners of Hillsborough and Beaverton, but bottom line, the construction of the pipes and the facilities have gone up significantly from estimates, largely due to some of the same inflationary things that you've all experienced in your lives. And then also the preparations to integrate that new water supply, those costs have also increased because we have to make sure that as we integrate the supply, it is very smooth and not interrupted. So what kind of increases are we talking about? Well, we're talking about $15.53 a month this go round starting November 1. And then follow it up depending upon how things go over this next year. But it looks like the following year will be $15.04 increase. We understand that those are significant. One of the things I forgot to mention early on was that we do have some of our commissioners, our elected board that basically governs us. They're my boss. And so we have Commissioner Fisher with us today. We have Commissioner Lysick with us today, and we have Commissioner Duggan with us today. So I think I got all of them. So I just want you to know that our commissioners are here and listening as well. And I think Commissioner Doan is also joining us. All right. So what have we done to try to help the financial situation to date? We did get $4 million in grants for the treatment plant on a $1.6 billion project. That's not much, but we continue to try to pursue additional grant money. We also got $5 million in grants for advanced metering and AMI for all of you, so you can better understand what kind of water you're using on a more real-time basis. And then we also got an $11 million grant for our Taylor's Ferry Reservoir project. These are to replace some aging reservoirs that are not seismically sound. So through this presentation, we're going to be focusing on some of these points here. So we want to make sure that our customers understand how does the community benefit from these investments in the Willamette. These are big, once in a generation investments, maybe even beyond. And then you want to know, are we managing these costs responsibly? What are we doing to manage the costs? And then also, is everyone paying their fair share? Are corporations paying their fair share? Who's paying what on this project? So that also will be covered in this presentation. And then one of the things that we've heard a lot of, and we've been thinking about a great deal, and a huge concern to our board is those of our customers that really can't afford these increases. Right. And so what are we doing to help them? So we're going to cover all these things in this presentation. And to get right to it, I'm turning this over to our Willamette Water Supply Program Director, Dave Kraska. And Dave, take it away.
All right, thank you, Tom. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. If you've seen any of these presentations before, it's going to look very familiar to you. I have a lot of the same information that I've shared with other virtual and in-person meetings in the past. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because, as Justin said, we want to get to your questions as quickly as possible. In my presentation, as well as giving you kind of an update on the overall Willamette Water Supply Program, I'm also kind of going to be covering some of, for the most part, two of those questions that Tom just mentioned. What are the benefits to the community and what are we doing to manage costs? So let's get into it. Do an overview of the Willamette Water Supply Program. As I've presented before, this decision was made back in 2013. TVW in Hillsborough selected the Willamette Water after a multi-year technical study with public input. Back at that time, both of those utilities, TVW and Hillsborough, were looking at their long-term water supply options. They considered these four shown on this graphic: Ag Lake, groundwater wells to the north, additional purchase from Portland, or going to the Willamette River. And they picked the Willamette River for the issues listed on the left-hand side of this graphic. Lower cost of the options considered, excellent water quality, provides ownership of the water supply, of the water source, It's reliable and fewer environmental impacts in terms of implementing any of these supplies. So with that, the program was started back in 2015, and we were given this mission, which is to provide a cost-effective, reliable, and resilient water supply system by July 2026 that benefits the current and future generations of the communities we serve and supports a vibrant local economy. So everything we do on the program is about accomplishing this mission, especially especially completing it by July 2026. So an overview of the whole system, it looks like this. It starts with our intake on the Willamette River located in Wilsonville, a new state-of-the-art water treatment plant that we're constructing in Sherwood, 30 miles of pipeline that connects it all, and then water storage tanks on the top of Cooper Mountain. The whole system is designed very robustly. It's a generational investment in water supply infrastructure. We want it to last 100 years, if not longer. And in that span of time, we expect earthquakes to occur. The subduction zone event, the Cascadia event, is the one that certainly we're designing for. Everything on the system was designed to be able to withstand a Cascadia subduction zone event, and it's currently being constructed to do so. Getting into economic considerations, the program spend to date, the most notable is that it's a great thing. It's a bit surprising how much of it has been local. Broadly, when this graphic was generated, 78% of the spend to date, about $500 million, has been to local companies, and there's a lot of them. 455 of them have been involved to date. Beyond that, regional and outside of Oregon and Washington companies are also involved, but a lot of the spend to date, the vast majority of the spend to date, has been local. Regarding controlling, so that gets into some of the benefits in terms of controlling our costs. One of the best ways that we do it is we try to not do these projects alone. Wherever we can, we partner on these projects. So for example, here's 3 examples right here. The Kinsman Road project was a partnership with the city of Wilsonville and ODOT. 124th Avenue was a partnership with Washington County. And we also install our pipelines ahead of development and work with the developers to make sure that we're not impacting their operations. And some of our pipeline work is continuing on in partnership with Washington County in Tualatin and Sherwood Road, Roy Rogers Road, Cornelius Pass, and other areas. So program cost history, I think it's important to you that I'm transparent in terms of where have we been, where did we start with the program cost, and where are we at today. So starting back in 2013, as I mentioned, there was the long-term water supply study that was done. And if we look at the cost escalated to 2026, it was $1.24 billion. That was the estimate for the overall program that we're implementing today. As I mentioned, we started running the program in 2015, and in 2016, we completed our preliminary design and value engineering. And there, at that time, we had an updated estimate of $1.3 billion. So that was basically the start of the program, the cost that we were working against. So since that time, we've been running the program, and each year we do a public display as far as where are we at with the cost of the overall program. And you can see that from baseline 1.1 to 8.1, at least to baseline 6.1, we were able to keep it to $1.2, $1.3 billion. So we were having pretty good financial control of the overall program cost. But then as Tom mentioned, in 2022, the baseline went from 1.3 to $1.6 billion. And I'll get into essentially what took place there at the end of calendar 2021, early calendar 2022. We were bidding all of our remaining major construction projects. And what came to realize back on the program at that time is there's a huge demand for labor and materials and equipment. All of that is out there in the industry. We're not the only ones. There's Intel, there's all the businesses that are happening out there, and short supply. A lot of that has been due to just labor force changes due to COVID, supply chain issues that we're all aware of. That's really the driver for this. A couple of big examples that we have here when we were bidding those projects at the end of 2020 are shown here in this graphic. The reservoir and related pipeline project, our estimated cost for that was $117 million. And that was the cost estimate prepared by professionals with contractor input. What should this project cost? And when we actually bid it and competitively bid it with multiple contractors bidding on this work, the bid price came in at $143 million. The water treatment plant was even worse. The estimated cost of that project, $292 million, and the bid price, $427 million. And that was, again, a competitively bid project We invited all contractors, all the suppliers to bid it. That's just the price of this work in this market at this time, unfortunately. So that meant an increased cost of the program of $315 million, moving the program cost from $1.3 billion to $1.6 billion. So with that, are we still on track? Are we still implementing the right supply? We did a quick look back at the other water supply options that we had to select from, and here they are. On the left-hand side of this are those other three options: the northern groundwater supply, continued purchase from Portland, and then the Hag Lake Dam Raise project. And the status since 2013 for each of those, if we look at the northern groundwater supply, there have been no studies, planning, or investigations or investments made. So essentially no progress on that whatsoever. So in terms of the fatal flaws for our mission, uncertain implementation, a lot of cost risk, and certainly would not be complete by 2026. We look at Portland. Since 2023, Portland chose to implement corrosion control and their filtration project that is now on the order of about a $2 billion project on its own. So those costs were not part of the financial analysis that was done back in 2013. So sticking with Portland would be even more expensive. So the fatal flaws there are significantly higher cost, lower level of seismic resiliency for TVWD's customers, no ownership of supply, and again, would not be complete by 2026. And finally, the Hag Lake Dam Raise project, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation decided not to raise the dam, basically just to improve its seismic reliability, so it would not provide the capacity and would not be complete by 2026. So we still believe we're on the right track. At this point, though, the fight to control costs is not over. It's still an intrinsic part of my job in running the program. As part of that, we cut $50 million in project costs. Anything that we could defer, we did. We're maximizing competition on all of our projects wherever we can. And when we do select somebody to do our work, we negotiate the best prices and quality for the services and goods. Even in construction, we're still making cost-effective engineering decisions and proactively managing risks early so that they don't come home to roost on us. Like I mentioned, continuing to partner on projects and rigorously managing all aspects of the program to stay on schedule. If you want to ruin a budget, go off schedule. Everything that we're doing is working to stay on schedule and getting this done on time, meeting our mission. So let me give you a few construction updates as far as where we're at. If you've driven around Washington County, you've probably seen our work. This is a map that's available on our website, ourallowablewater.org, and it shows all the 14 projects that are in construction right now. Some quick photos here. So this is at the bank of the Willamette River, showing construction of our seismic improvements and stability improvements that we've done of our intake on the Willamette River. So that work is complete, and the park that's next to the water treatment plant down there in Wilsonville has been restored and reopened to the public. Work continues on the upper site near that facility for our electrical building and all of the related equipment for it, making good progress there. And as well, our pipeline installation continues, as I said, in many roadways around Washington County. Like I said, if you've driven around Washington County, you've probably seen some of this work taking place. This photo is actually down in Wilsonville. Our water treatment plant near the intersection of 124th Avenue and Tualatin and Sherwood Road continues construction there on about a 20-acre site. A lot of activity happening there. Sometimes we work at night in order to minimize our impacts to traffic and to businesses. Our contractors, inspectors, and all of our workers essentially perform the work at night. And then finally, I think the last photo that I have here of our work taking place, again, a really quick spin through all of our activities, is our reservoir project on the top of Cooper Mountain, right off Grabborn Road. Big pipeline project and reservoir construction there, making great progress on that project there. So that's a quick spin through the overall program and everything. I'm going to pass it off now to Paul Matthews, the CFO of TVWD. Take it away, Paul.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to pick up where Dave's left off, talking about how we're managing costs, how we're saving our money, saving our customers money. I've got 4 examples here. Some of them Dave talked about, but first, managing our operating expenses. And during the most recent biennium, which we have a biennium budget period, a 2-year budget period, we've been able to manage our operating budget to generate over $12 million in savings. That is through June 30 of 2023. So we're managing those operating costs very carefully. We've deferred capital projects to better align with our cash flow requirements. The increase that we've seen in the construction cost is making us look very hard at all of our capital outlays to make sure that the timing of those is compatible with our financial capacity. Continue to partner with other agencies. And the other thing is finding other resources. We recently changed our strategy on our low interest loan that we have with the EPA, a so-called WIFIA loan. We've changed how we're operating that WIFIA loan so we can achieve over $6 million of interest earnings in the past year, just to offset the cost for our customers. And in fact, we've had over $20 million of federal grants that Tom talked about earlier to offset our customer costs as well. So we're keenly focusing on the saving customer money. I want to give you just two other examples that are particular, I think, noteworthy. First of all, on our healthcare costs, the district has an incentive-based healthcare program to minimize our costs. Just like all businesses, healthcare costs have been going up over time. We're self-insured for a part of this. We have a wellness plan at the district that provides incentives for our employees to manage their healthcare expenditures. And in fact, I'm happy to announce that in January of this year, we saw a 4.5% decrease in our healthcare premiums from our insurer. So this is an environment where healthcare costs tend to be going up. We've actually seen a decrease in our healthcare cost, and we're happy that occurs because that's real savings that goes right to our customers. I mentioned our low interest loan, the WIFI loan that we have with the federal government. We pay the federal government an interest rate of 1.35% on that money. By changing how we draw that money, we're able to reinvest that in actually U.S. Treasuries, and we've been able to increase our interest earnings on that by over $6 million, which is a sizable amount for a one-year period. The things that are driving our rates, obviously, the investment that Mr. Kraska described is the most significant driver to our rates, and that's building the new water supply program. This investment will bring the water into the Tualatin Valley, but it does come with quite a bit of cost. Now, the other is to make sure that we're doing responsible maintenance to our existing infrastructure. The district has a lot of pipes, reservoirs, pump stations throughout its system. We need to make sure they're well maintained to extend their lives, and also we need to operate those. The cost of electricity, chemicals, and everything else, the gasoline to drive vehicles around has gone up as well, and that's a driver to our rates. And the last item I want to mention here is our purchased water costs. So right now, we experienced a 26% increase this year in the cost of wholesale water from the city of Portland. That's one of the reasons that we are pursuing this Willamette project, is so that we can have more independence. But that is a 26% increase in our wholesale water, and that is the single largest item in our material and services budget. I want to give you a little bit of context on the numbers. And so we have three representative years here of how the district spends its money. Fiscal year 2024, FY is finance speak for fiscal year 2024, which for us will end June 30 of 2024. That's the first bar that you see here on the chart. The green area is what we pay for all the personnel that we have, and benefits, salaries, and all the costs associated with having employees. The blue area is our material and services budget. This includes things like chemicals, power to pump water, all the contracts that we have. For example, we contract out with people to print and mail our water bills. That is included in our material and services budget. The brown/black area near the top of that is what we call our rate-funded capital outlay, or PAYGO, as some people will call it. This is money that we're using to pay for the Willamette and the other improvements that we have. And then the red area at the very top is our debt service. And so we're using debt to lower the overall cost on our customers over time, but we are then going to have debt service that we will repay over 30 to 35 year period. So you can see in 2024, we have very little debt and a lot more of our money going to capital outlay. We also are using reserves, by the way, that we have saved up over time to help pay for the Willamette project. You can see in 2027, the debt service increases and the capital amount for capital goes down. 2027 is the first year when the water supply program is completed. That fiscal year 2027 starts on July 1 of 2026. And then we are showing fiscal year 2030 out there in the distance, where we'll be kind of at a more status quo environment. You can see that's where the debt service is fully in place. Our capital outlay, if you look at the district spending, and we've been watching this spending curve come at us now since 2013. We had a plan to build the infrastructure. We knew that was coming. We are now in the 2 highest years of capital outlay to build the program. $400 million, as you can see. The blue area at the top of this chart is for the Willamette water supply system. The dark area at the bottom is the in-district CIP, but that also includes a major pipeline, our Metzger Pipeline East, that the program is providing to TVW to build in on our behalf. In any event, you can see that the capital outlay is going to drop significantly at the completion of this project. So we'll start paying debt service rather than have the major investment in that capital outlay. But we also plan to use long-term debt, responsibly use long-term debt to pay for the program. In 2024, we'll use the rest of our low-interest loan from the EPA. That's at a 1.35% interest. And then in the coming years, we plan to do additional borrowing of about $120 million, depending on several factors, interest rates. There's a lot of things that go into that calculation to pay for this capital outlay. So one of the questions that we know customers have asked in the past and are curious about is, are all of our customers, including corporations, paying their fair share of the Willamette Water Supply Program? And the district does follow a industry standard cost of service methodology to make sure that happens. But I want to provide some numbers just to put it in context. Presented in this chart is the breakdown of our customers, the number of meters that we have by the class of customers. And if you look, you can see that our single-family and multifamily residential customers comprise about 95% of the meters that we have. Our commercial, about 2%. The industrial is so small, it's only 23 meters. It doesn't register with any significant decimal point. The other includes things like irrigation meters and fire lines, about 3%. So those are the number of customers. If we look on the revenue side, though, those 23 customers generate about 8% of our revenue throughout the year. So the 95% of customers generate about 71% of the revenue. Now, that is based on our cost to service methodology. But let me just give you an example for a large industrial customer, because there are concerns. Are they getting a particular deal? And in fact, they're not. They're seeing the same rate increases that all of our customers are. Presented here is an example of a bill for one of our industrial customers. As you can see that in November of 2023, we're estimating that their monthly bill, this is on a monthly basis, will go up by about $44,000 and then about $43,000 in the subsequent year. And this is, of course, to cover the cost that we've been talking about in the earlier part of the presentation. So we do have guiding principles that we follow. It's called a cost of service methodology of setting rates within the water industry. There are standards that we follow to make sure that customers pay in proportion to the cost imposed in the system. The district has a 2-block rate structure, so those customers that use more water in the peak period, which is more expensive for us to provide, pay a higher average cost of water. It's embedded into our rate structure itself. And the other thing at the very bottom is that we mentioned there is that we have something called system development charges. These are one-time capital charges that people pay when they connect to the system so that growth will pay for itself. We're not asking existing customers to cover the cost of growth. The system development charges are used for that end. One of the other questions that we've received over the years is the impact that this is having on our most vulnerable customers, and what plan do we have to be able to help them. In this past year, in 2022, we convened a rate advisory committee. This was a follow-on to a rate advisory committee that we convened in 2016, 2017 to answer really 2 questions for our Board of Commissioners. First, what do we do affordability for financially vulnerable TVWD customers? And another one was a more technical issue on our rate structure itself. And I want to talk about the recommendation that came from that rate advisory committee on the issue of affordability. First, when we did convene this, we purposely got a very diverse group of individuals to serve on the rate advisory committee. They had various backgrounds, different customer classifications, and we made sure that we had a wide demographic base for that. I'm happy to report that this group came together and provided a consensus recommendation to our board that on the customer assistance program. There are a couple key elements to that I want to highlight. First, who can qualify? They looked at a lot of different qualifications, and essentially they came down to qualify for the program, you should be a low-income customer. So we adopted the same qualification guidelines as the federal government uses for the low-income home energy assistance program, the so-called LIHEAP program. So if you are senior but not of a low income, if you're a wealthy senior and you don't qualify for the LIHEAP program, then you wouldn't qualify for this program. So it would be low-income people only. The reason for that, they wanted to make sure that the assistance we're able to provide could help those customers most in need. The assistance would be a 20% discount on the customer's bills, gave the board flexibility to manage that over time. And they recommended that we use a third party to qualify customers that would qualify for the program, so that our staff didn't have to collect income information, other information that would be expensive for us to maintain confidentially. So that was the other part of the recommendation. The last part of this is how would we fund this program? And their recommendation is that it be funded from all customers proportionally to our fixed and volume cost. Okay, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, what our proposed rates are. The district has a rate structure that includes a fixed charge. Most of our customers are charged on a bi-monthly basis. We present this on a monthly basis to make it easier for people to compare to their other utility bills, notwithstanding the fact that most of our customers are charged every other month. So the fixed charges vary based on the meter size. This is also based on the cost of serving. Larger meters cost a little bit more to maintain, and they put more demand on our system. On the other hand, it doesn't take more to read them. The cost of reading a meter is related to the labor and the time it takes to read a meter. Those are the proposed fixed monthly charges. In addition to that, we have a 2-block rate structure. The first block is for the first 14 CCF on a monthly basis. Now, again, most of our customers are billed on a bi-monthly basis, so that would be 28 CCF on a 2-month basis. For our non-single-family residential customers, it's 140% of their average annual consumption. And actually, that ends up being that fair equitable amount, because we're trying to recover these peak-related costs and the cost imposed on the system. And as we did our cost of service analysis, the 140% was found to be in alignment. In addition to our talking about the rates themselves, I want to give you some sample bills so you can see what the impact will be on customers. Our typical customer is a single-family residential customer that uses 7 CCF per month. So this is the most common bill that we issue, actually. It's the most frequent bill, has 7 CCF of water consumption on it. Everybody's bill varies. Usually it has a seasonality to it, but this is the most common bill. The monthly increase would be $15.53 a month, starting November 1 of 2023. And we're estimating $15.04 per month, starting in November 1 of 2024. That is the proposal that we're bringing to the Board of Commissioners. For an above average customer, this would be a customer that is taking about 9,000 gallons of water per month, 1,200 cubic feet per month. That's about 9,000 gallons, or actually more than 37 tons of water, if you want to look at it in that perspective. The increase would be as shown on this table. And then for a customer that uses quite a bit of water, somebody that's a very high demand customer, this would be a customer using 28 CCF per month. That's quite a bit of water. That's almost 21,000 gallons per month, or 42,000 gallons over that 2-month period. 87 tons of water. Their bill would be going up by $57 a month and $55.50 per month, as you can see in the table presented here. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to our CEO, Mr. Hickmann.
Thank you, Paul. And let me just jump forward to this next slide. So we started out with what we believed the major themes or questions were that we've heard and will hear from our customers. And I believe you heard our program director, Dave Kraska, talk about how the community benefits from the Willamette. This is a reliable long-term water supply that is seismically resilient. So this is something that ensures that not only you, but our businesses that employ you can stay up and running after a seismic event. You also heard from Dave Kraska about how we manage costs, and I believe we are managing costs responsibly. We follow strict protocol that is industry standard for project management, and we try to use innovation where we can to control costs. And you heard about that from Dave. And then we also answered the question about are all the customers paying their fair share? And I think you heard that while it's about 95% of our customers are residential, they pay about 75% of the total rates. The industries pick up the rest. So we do believe they are paying their fair share, and we're in a defensible position to explain that. And then lastly, the concern about those that are going to struggle with these increased rates. What are we going to do to help them? As you heard from our CFO, Paul Matthews, we had a rate advisory committee, and we have reached out to the community, and we will be implementing a program that will help reduce those that qualify. We will reduce their bill in order to help them help offset these increases. So with that, we want to get directly to the questions. So I'm going to turn this back over to Justin Dyke.
Thanks, Tom. Don't go too far, though. The first two are for you. We've got some questions from customer Richard Shum. First one is question one. If Oregon doesn't sell water to California, do we still need all these new projects to store water?
So I'm unaware of the state of Oregon selling water to California, or that even being proposed. There's a number of water laws that would make that a challenge to do so, and it would also be pretty controversial. But we did plan on a regional basis, and Dave Kraska hit on that, where we looked at a bunch of different alternatives for a future water supply before we landed on the Willamette. And every individual water system has to account for their own storage needs. So having a statewide storage system doesn't answer the more local regional needs for that.
And question two starts off as Oregon is surrounded by water. Our neighborhood states like Idaho and Utah are much drier, but they don't raise rates like we do, nor do they have water storage problems. Why does Oregon have water storage problem compared to our drier neighbor states?
Certainly understand that question. I have colleagues throughout the U.S., and what I can tell you is it's not just every state, but every individual system is different and quite unique. So it's all dependent on the investment cycle that any entity is in. So in other words, there are places that made a large capital investment maybe decades ago, and as a result, after making that big investment, they're in a situation where their increases are much more in line with lower inflation rates. On the other hand, when any entity makes a significant investment in their system, like we are, and like the city of Portland is, when we make these major investments, rates do go up. And so it's really hard to compare across distances to say one is out of line compared to the other, because it's all tied to where they're at in their investment cycle. And certainly, as we've identified here, we're at a significant step in our investment cycle. I'll add one more thing to this, and I don't know if I have any colleagues on from the city of Wilsonville right now, but One of the things that you can look at is 20 years ago, when the city of Wilsonville was making their investment for a new treatment plant and supply off the Willamette, their rates were the highest in the state, way higher than everybody else. Now, because after they made that investment, they're now down towards the bottom. So this is one of those things that is all about the investment cycle. And over time, our rates will come down as others go up and make their investments.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
Tom, I'm sorry, Justin, can I add
Go
just
ahead,
one
Paul.
thing to that? And Tom, you may want to mention the role that the Bureau of Reclamation plays in subsidizing water in neighboring states can be fairly significant.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for that reminder. So that is very true that some of our neighboring states are heavily subsidized by the Bureau of Reclamation in their water supply. And that also helps keep costs down. So if you're talking about irrigation, irrigation is heavily subsidized by the federal government. And we don't have that luxury. I can tell you, over the last couple of years, myself and my board chair, we have been working very hard to get the federal government involved in this project to help ease these increases. To date, as I explained, we've had some success. It's been pretty small. We'll take the money that they are providing, and we're not done asking. And I should also mention, we aggressively went after money through the state, trying to get assistance on a state level, because this is the economic engine for the state, this region, and this water supply. We tried to convince state legislators there was a reason for the state to invest in this project. Unfortunately, we were not successful. Doesn't mean we're done. We will continue to push on that and see if we can't get some progress and additional funding there.
All right. The next question is going to be for Dave Kraska. It is, again, from Richard Shum. Says, I used to big companies here in Hillsborough. A successful contractor is to log in the prices up front and penalize the vendor if they fall behind schedule. Is the goal to make the vendors bleed and still complete the projects? Is TVWD following these practices from these successful companies in our area?
Thank you for the question. I'd like to say that we're using best practices for municipal water supply public infrastructure projects. And so let me walk you through what that looks like. Starts off with our design contracts. We prepare a design for whatever infrastructure we're building, whether it's a pipeline or a reservoir or the water treatment plant. Complete the design for that work, and then we publicly bid the work. And so when we publicly bid it, we try to encourage as much competition as possible for every aspect of all of the projects that we have. So we think that's one of the best ways really to control costs on it, because that's our best opportunity to negotiate the best costs for all of our infrastructure projects. And so from that, we get bids on our projects, and then we evaluate the bids to make sure that they're responsive, that they're actually work the contractor can perform successfully before we award the contract. And then we have a contract with a contractor, which means we have an agreement in terms of the scope and the price to perform that scope, and also by when they are to complete it. So that's our best tool to manage the work going forward. Then we have construction management and inspection professionals on every single one of our projects, watching everything the contractor does and evaluating the work in terms of their quality and delivery and schedule performance. If they get off track with any of those, we have them corrected. In terms of the schedule performance, that's critical to us, as I mentioned before, our on-time completion. And the tool that we have implemented on some of our projects is what's called liquidated damages. Whereas if the contractor were to complete late, they are assessed these liquidated damages, basically a penalty for completing that work late. And they're pretty severe on some of our contracts, and they're a great tool that I can use to keep the contractors on schedule. So far, I haven't had to use that tool at all. So far, all the contracts and construction work is proceeding very well. But that's essentially how we go about managing it. I believe it's best practices. We have a lot of experienced professionals working on this, and I think we're making good progress so far. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Dave. The next question is again from Richard, and it will be answered by Paul. Question is, question 4, you are not saving the customer's money. Currently, the average monthly water rate for a family of 4 is around $40. A $15 per month increase is a 37.5% increase, and you plan to do it twice, and there is no end to these. You attribute the cause to inflation, but inflation is nowhere close to 37%. How can you justify these huge increases?
So I'm not sure exactly where the $40 came from. I can tell you where the $15.53 came from. We calculated that, and it's presented here in the table that I covered earlier in the presentation. I apologize. We went through the presentation pretty quickly so we could get to the question and answers, and I may not have spent much time on this table, but here's the impact on that typical customer based on the rates and the consumption of 7 CCF that are in these tables. So for that typical customer, it's a 5/8 inch meter. That is what virtually all of our single-family residential customers have, and that then generates the bill calculations here. No, I think technically you're right. We are not, when I was talking about savings money earlier in my presentation, I was talking about saving money by, for example, reducing our healthcare premiums by 4.5%. That does save money. If we had a 4.5% increase in healthcare costs, then obviously our rate increases would need to be more than the $15.53. So that's what I meant by that. Sorry if that was not clear in my presentation. Again, we went through this pretty quickly. And as it relates to the inflation, what we're talking about here is actually experiencing a huge capital improvement and financing that over a period of time. So if you look at our capital outlay, that chart that I presented earlier, this is a very large project for the water district. Literally, as Dave indicated, the Willamette Water Supply program is managing a $1.6 billion water supply program. And so a small amount of inflation on such a large program experienced all at once can have a very significant increase. And the numbers that Dave gave, and we can go back and talk about those if need be, are based on real actual bids. So it's not just sort of this general inflation rate, it's actual bids from a competitively bid project. I hope I answered the question fully. Maybe Dave, if you have anything you wanted to add to that.
Nothing this time unless there's further questions.
Okay, thank you.
And Paul, we'll keep you on standby here. We've got 2 more in a row that I believe are going to be up your wheelhouse from the Q&A from customer Justin Pott. So the project costs increased around 20% over estimates from a few years ago. Why does this require a roughly 40% total increase in water rates over the next 2 years?
And it comes down to how we're financing this. And I don't want to get too technical, but I'm going to try to be as try to present this in the most straightforward way that I can. In order to borrow the money, we need to build the financial capacity to demonstrate the repayment ability. So when the cost goes up, it's as if you're buying a house, and to qualify for the mortgage, you have to have a certain income. Well, when the cost of the Willamette Water Supply program went up, we have to not only afford to pay the debt service, but to have the financial capacity to do so. And that's it's our what we call our net leverage calculation. That is what is driving the needs for these rate increases, is to maintain the district's leverage at a level that is sustainable in the market, and that will keep us viable to borrow the money necessary to complete the project.
And then the next question is, will the proposed rate hikes apply to seniors, individuals with disabilities, and individuals on fixed incomes? Why isn't the rate hike tied to water usage rather than flat fees? People who are environmentally conscious should have a break.
Yes, and that's a good question. I'm sorry that we weren't clear in our discussion of this. The increase will be on both the fixed and the volume charge, and it will relate to the amount of water that customers do use. So As I showed in the presentation, if you are a typical single family, which is that 7 CCF per month, you will experience about a $15.53 increase. But if you're a very large user, some of it uses, as I mentioned, 87 tons of water per month, you will see a much higher increase. So it's not a flat rate. It's actually based on the amount of water that you use and the cost of service methodology that underlies that.
And we're going to go back to.
I'm sorry, I think I missed part of the question, which was, Justin, wasn't there a part about seniors, et cetera? Can you read that to me to make sure I cover it?
Yep. Will the proposed rate hikes apply to seniors, individuals with disabilities, and individuals on fixed income?
Yeah. So the rate increases will apply to all customers and all the rates that we have. We are planning to implement the customer assistance program that our rate advisory committee recommended, and that will provide relief to those low-income customers that qualify once that program is in place.
So we're going to go back over to the questions from Richard. This is his fifth question. Your water rate increases doesn't not reflect the high water consumption in the summer when homeowners water the lawns to avoid wildfires in the residential neighborhoods. Why do you charge high rates for higher water usage in the summer when we, the homeowners, try to beautify our neighborhoods and avoid forest/wildfires in Washington County? Our neighborhood states like Utah offer irrigation water at low rates. Why don't we adopt these good practices? And sorry, Richard, for butchering some of that.
Is that a question for me, Justin?
Yes, it is, Paul.
So our methodology is based on the cost of service principles, the industry standards that the American Water Works Association provides us. A couple things about that. It does cost the district more to oversize facilities to meet that peak demand. And I think someone asked a question about peaking periods. So with the water system, there are multiple peak periods that we have. First is to meet the fire needs. We have to make sure that we have enough capacity in our water system to meet that fire flow requirement. Every hydrant in the district should a fire break out. And that requires a certain amount of infrastructure to do that. But during the peak period, which is in the summer months, and particularly on those very hot days, we need to have enough capacity in the water system to meet all those demands of customers. Having built out that capacity to meet that demand does cost more and gets lower utilization just during that peak period. So the cost of service methodology recognizes that if you put a larger peak demand on the system and that costs the district more, that your burden would be shared proportionally amongst all the customers to the cost you put on the system. So if we were to ignore that peaking cost as an example and just arbitrarily lower that peak rate, then we'd have to recover the cost from another customer who isn't peaking on the system, and using our cost service approach, that would be a subsidy from a customer that doesn't peak to a customer that does.
All right, Paul, we'll keep you on the line here. We've got a short list of questions from Diane. The first one is, are the rate increases for commercial and larger rentals, i.e. apartment buildings?
Yes.
And Diane asks, is there a senior discount?
Well, the customer assistance program that we are putting together now, that will be implemented in the coming months, will have a low income discount. To the extent that a senior citizen has low income, they would qualify for the program. But just being a senior citizen alone, if you have a high income, you wouldn't necessarily qualify.
And Diane asks, what is the per gallon increase? Will our bills be based on per gallon use or flat rate increase per single family residence?
It's a great question. So it will be, we use hundreds of cubic feet, which is a traditional measure of water use, probably because back in the day an engineer measured things in cubic feet, and we're stuck with that. So 100 cubic feet is about 7.48 gallons of water. So our rates are described in hundreds of cubic feet, which would be 748 gallons of water. And so it is a combination of a fixed charge that will help cover the cost, for example, the fire protection I mentioned earlier, making sure that our hydrants have water in them at all times, and the oversizing the pipes to make sure that enough water can get to those hydrants, the storage reservoirs, the pumping system, et cetera, and a volume charge as well. So it'll apply to both components of our rate structure.
And Diane's fourth question is, has issuing bonds been considered?
Yes, in fact, it's an important part of our strategy. And I do believe that I have a graph that I can pull up just to explain what our plan is in that regard. So we are using long-term debt. We have a $388 million low-interest loan from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is at 1.35% interest. We just completed a bond issue in May. We closed on May 31st, and we have another bond issue, another borrowing planned of $120 million. Now, our plan to borrow the $120 million will depend on a couple factors. First, water sales and other interest cost, interest earnings will offset that amount. So we show 119.8 in this table. That is an estimate. It's going to be somewhere between $100 and $130 million, depending on the specific details, the market conditions at the time. So we will do that. The other thing is that we may look at another loan from the federal government. Interest rates have gone up, so I wouldn't describe that as a low interest loan, but there are some other advantages of doing that that can help keep our cost to our customers as low as possible. So debt can be a great tool, it can be a bad habit, and we're trying to find the happy medium to do that. I mentioned earlier our net leverage, that does put a limit on how much money the district can borrow without having to increase rates yet again, just to demonstrate the financial capacity to borrow money. Well, you don't want to increase rates just to show that you can borrow the money. You want to make sure that you borrow the right amount to pay for the capital improvements, no more than you need and no more than you can afford. So the financial plan that we have factors these into the calculations.
And then Paul, one more for you from Diane. Is this a temporary rate increase that will end once the project is completed?
So what we anticipate is the rate increases will abate. Obviously, when we get through the completion of this program, we actually will be in a financial situation, as Tom described the city of Wilsonville, where they were the highest in the region. Now they're one of the lowest. We won't see the rates go away because we'll have to pay off that debt service. And I think I wanted to illustrate that through this table, that we borrow the money to keep the rates low, but then we have to pay off that money that we borrowed. And we'll shift from investing the dollars in rate funded capital or PAYGO to helping retire the district's long-term debt. So that's the strategy. But we won't see these kinds of increases because the capital improvement plan, notwithstanding we have some deferred projects, will be much less than the current water supply program, again, that big $1.6 billion program.
All right. Our next question comes from Daryl, who writes, please explain the term I've heard a few times, peak period. Thanks. Paul, I think that's another one for you.
So, yeah, I'm sorry. We use some of this, some of our language is very industry specific. So when we're talking about a peak period for a water system, typically we're talking about either the peak season, because a lot of our facilities are sized to meet that peak system demand, especially storage facilities like our investment in the Joint Water Commission at the Barney Reservoir. That's to meet our peak season demands. But then we have facilities that are sized to meet our peak day demands. And so the large pipe that Dave's team is designing to bring the Willamette water in is sized to meet those peak day demands. So we talk about what a peak period is. It really depends on the facility that we're talking about. And of course, some of our facilities are sized to meet that fire flow requirement. So it just varies depending on the component. For most of our transmission system, we're talking about peak day capacity. For some of our systems, they don't respond to a period, like a meter, for example. Reading a meter isn't related to the amount of water that goes through that, but the size of the pipe in the street is.
All right. And next question for you, Paul, is once the projects are completed, will the rates go back down?
I don't anticipate the rates going back down. That would be nice. And again, the reason is that we will be using that rate revenue to pay off the long-term debt. So we're going to slide over from funding capital to retiring debt. And so what we'll see is increases that are less than what they otherwise would be or maybe years where we wouldn't have increases. But I don't anticipate that the rates will go down. We have covenants with the lenders, including the EPA, but also our other bondholders, that we will maintain sufficient revenue coming into the district to pay off the debt and also to maintain the system and keep it in good repair. They want that assurance that the district will maintain its assets in a state that prevents it from running into financial difficulties and impairing their repayments. So I don't anticipate the rates to go down, but they won't increase as we've seen recently.
Okay, Paul, the next one will be for you, and it is from George. George writes, I have been living in the same house on Cooper Mountain for 30 years. TVWD service has always been fine, and I continue to accept rate increases that keep up with inflation. But I'm having difficulty accepting the cost of major investments that I had nothing to do with. As you know, massive development is behind the need for even more water. Without this increased demand, Bull Run would have been sufficient. So I haven't done anything to get billed for improvements I wasn't responsible for. I expect the developers and new homeowners to pay for new investments. I'm asking, why am I not shielded from changes I'm not responsible for?
That's a great question too. And I go back to our cost of service methodology. We do use system development charges so that new development pays its proportionate share of the growth. TVWD is in a bit of a different situation than some of our partners in that we're actually replacing the supply from the city of Portland. So we have a supply from the city of Portland. Now, I mentioned earlier, we got a 26.1% increase in the bill from the city of Portland because they're building out their new treatment plant. I think Mr. Kraska just described that investment that Portland is making earlier in our presentation. So this is a substitute to replace the water that we're getting from Portland to provide more long-term assurances that the region has the water it needs. It's not necessarily just to provide water for growth. And in fact, TVWD's service area is not seeing a large increase in water demands, and nor are we projecting a large increase in revenue from new development.
And Paul, next one for you again from Michael, who writes, you state the commercial/industry has a larger share of the costs. You base this number on meters. You base this on the number of meters, not the amount of water consumed. How does it compare based on actual usage?
Yeah, so it's proportionate to the cost of providing service to these customers, and that was the point I was trying to make. We've had questions in the past that corporations and businesses aren't paying their fair share, like there's some sort of a discount or something that they're getting, and that isn't the case. It's all based on our cost of service methodology and the cost of providing water to those customers.
All right, and the next one, Paul, you were going to finally get a bit of a break for a moment. We're going to have Pete Boone, our step in here to answer the next question. Comes from Daryl, who writes, my fixed charge is $42. Can I get a smaller meter put in to lower that rate? Pete, are you available?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I can just give you a brief outline of how we size meters. So if a customer comes to us, say they want to connect to our system, we ask for information from them about the number of fixtures in their home or business that will be using water. So sinks, toilets, washing machines, things like that. So that's what helps us figure out the correct size of meter to provide enough flow through that meter to serve all those fixtures. So we are relying on that information from the customer. You can ask for a different size meter if you want to submit a new request that shows maybe you did some changes in your home, you remodeled, and your needs are different. You can ask for us to look at that sizing again. If we do agree to working with you again to put in a different size meter, there is a cost to that. We're putting a new device in your meter box. We're responding out in the field and spending some effort there. So there is a cost, and sometimes that cost. So for instance, that can be about $300 for that service call to come out, whereas the incremental cost and the incremental change in your fixed cost may be on the order of $5 to $10. So it would take quite a few billing cycles for that to break even.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for jumping in on that one for us. And our next question is going to be for Dave. Dave, this is a question from Richard, who writes, concerning contract and vendor management. I like what I hear from your explanation, yet your key reason for the rate increases is project costs. Why project costs continue to go up? Are you coming up with new projects constantly?
Thank you very much for the question. And I don't know, Justin, are you running the slides, or Paul? If you are, Paul, can you go to slide 19? So while that's happening, the costs are not continuing to go up. There was basically an incremental event that happened back in late 2021, early 2022. So why I asked to bring this slide up is, let me call your attention to the third column there. So the third column there is the total budget. Basically, it's the total program cost, and it's based on the estimates of the work in front of us, what it's going to take to complete all of that. In the early days of the program, they were all entirely estimates and based on limited information. Then as we completed design, we got better and better information. We refined some of the approaches and everything, and you can see some of those numbers changing over time. And then we got from 2021 to 2022, where we bid all of our remaining construction activity, and now we have contracts for all of the remaining construction projects that we have to complete the WWSS. And you can see between 2022 and 2023, the total budget for the program has not changed. So now that we have these contracts to manage, we believe we have all the tools in place to manage the costs going forward in order to complete the construction of the entire WWSS. Between the contracts that we have and the contingencies that we have in the budgets and so on, we had the budget of $1.62 billion in 2022. We've kept that in 2023, and that's my budget working going forward. So we're not anticipating the cost to exceed beyond that. It's going to be difficult because the market is still very difficult regarding short in terms of labor supplies and huge demand for materials and everything and so on. It'll continue to be a challenge, but our goal is to stay within the $1.62 billion budget because we are not adding any projects or making any changes. We're holding these contractors to these contracts and trying to complete the work within them. So again, thank you for the question.
And Dave, don't go too far away. The next one's going to be for you as well. It's from Julie, who writes, the construction work on Shoals Ferry, for example, between Denny and Hall has greatly exceeded the timeline that was communicated to customers. Wouldn't this be an example of a time when penalties would be applied to the contractor?
Yeah, the short answer is no, and let me explain why. So that particular project, at least not yet. Let me change the no to a not yet, and hope that we don't have to. So that particular project is what we call our MPE 1.2 project. It's in Shoals Ferry Road that's on the west side of 217. So that the extent of that whole project starts in Shoals Ferry Road on the west side of 217, crosses 217, across Hall Boulevard, all the way up to Allen, then it goes west on Allen up to Western Boulevard. So basically that's the entire project that the particular contractor, Emery, is to complete. Liquidated damages may apply if they complete that entire project beyond the schedule. The fact that they're having there are certain segments inside that project that are taking longer than others is not cause to apply liquidated damages or penalties on this particular contractor. The details of that particular work in the particular area that you're talking about is related to a relocation that we need PGE to perform. There's one of their power poles that's in our way, and we've been working with them to try to move that power pole so our contractor can complete the work. And PGE is getting around to it. They haven't done it yet. And so our contractor has had to get creative and basically move their operations around while they wait for PGE to do that relocation. So right now, that particular project is actually, even though it's frustrating for everybody that lives around that area and everybody that has to drive through that area, I totally get it. I live near that area and it is frustrating and everyone wants us gone. Believe me, I know, I sympathize. But our contractor is working very hard to work around that and move that out of the way and get that work done. In fact, they're well below budget and they're below contingency and everything. So it's actually a pretty well performing project overall. But in that particular area that you're pointing out, it is taking longer and it has been harder than anticipated. But we're going to continue working on it and try to get that done within the overall schedule for that project. And all I can say is thank you and appreciate your patience while we're trying to get that work done. So thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Paul, we're going to go back to you. We've got 3 questions from Diane, who writes, are our rates going to be the highest in the state? Is Wilsonville's now lower rates due to other increases?
So I can't answer the question about higher than the highest in the state. I do know that we are going to be certainly have very high rates for the next several years. And that kind of comes back to the Wilsonville. The reason I can't say about the high, there are parts of the state of Oregon where water rates are extremely high. Usually that happens in small communities where they don't get the economies of scale that TVWD is able to achieve. And so as Tom indicated earlier, everything's a particular circumstance, and there will more likely than not be some utilities out there that have rates that are higher than TVWDs. But I haven't done the research to tell you where or how many there are. But as it relates to Wilsonville, so as you go through these investment cycles, and I think Tom talked about this earlier, you make these major investments, you take on additional debt, you get through the investment process, and your financial needs then stabilize over a period of time, while other utilities are making other investments. So Wilsonville and TVW in partnership with Wilsonville back in 2000 built the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant. That was a major investment for the city. Their rates went very high. They were at the top of the league. They've come down as the rest of folks have gone up. The city of Tigard has gone up to the top when they built their new water supply in partnership with the city of Lake Oswego, and now over time they're starting to come down. The city of Portland and TVWD are in their major investment cycle. So we're doing our project, which is quite large. The city of Portland is building their new treatment plant, which is going to be about $1.8 to $2 billion, and that's going to drive their rates up higher. In fact, I did mention our 26% rate increase that we got from the city of Portland. So Wilsonville's are lower just because of the passage of time and the lack of need to increase rates because they made that major investment and there weren't additional investments that were required. They're paying off their debt and they're going to be in fine shape. And we will, over time, see the same kind of benefit for TVWD as will eventually the city of Portland.
The next question from Diane is not the rate lower at night for water usage for single family homes?
Oh, that's a great question. So a couple things about that. We talked about the peak period and we talked about the off-peak period. With the electricity, you will actually see that. And the reason you can see that with the electricity is it's dispatchable. So you can have time of use periods. And we take advantage of that when we operate our pump systems. We'll pump water at night. But we do need to maintain that fire suppression capacity. And oftentimes at nights when we recover our reservoirs and do other things to make sure that we have adequate water. In the future, Tom mentioned our AMI project. It may be possible for us to look at time of use rates. But right now, the cost of getting that data would exceed the benefits for our customers. And so we aren't looking at that in the near term. I'm not sure that we would necessarily find our capacity savings in that mechanism. We'd have to look very carefully. Again, water is a little different than electricity. It weighs 8.34 pounds per gallon. You got to move it all over the place. And we use gravity to do that. So it's a little bit more difficult to get those time of use benefits. On a day basis, yeah, probably getting down to night may be a little bit more difficult, but that's something that as we get advanced metering infrastructure in place, we can certainly look at that possibility.
And the last question from Diane is, will this affect our sewage costs as well? Paul, can you handle that one for us?
Yes, another great question. So appreciate these questions. The sewage rate is set by Clean Water Services. So we have a partnership with a completely different agency with a different board, different elected officials. Actually, Clean Water Services is governed by the County Board of Commissioners. They're a county service district. But we, to achieve, again, economies of scale and save money, we do joint billing with Clean Water Services. So we actually send out bills for TVWD and Clean Water Services on the same bill. That means we only pay the company that prints the bill to print it once. We pay the U.S. Postal Service to mail it, etc. And we have a great partnership with Clean Water Services to process those bills. And in fact, we actually do the billing for the customers that are not TVWD customers as well. We have a similar arrangement with the city of Beaverton where we bill their sewer customers. That would be our water customers. And again, it's all trying to drive down the cost by getting the economies of scale. So I think I answered that question.
Yep. And then, Paul, you will have one more question for you here, but I'd like to take a moment to remind folks that we will stay around as long as questions are coming in, but we have one question left. So while Paul answers this last one, if you do have any other final thoughts, please put them into the chat and we can address them. But Paul, the last question right now comes from Tom, not our Tom internally, but who writes, our volume rate has increased 28% over the past 3 years. This proposal will result in an additional 62% increase in volume rate and a 43% increase in the fixed rate. Why are these increases so severe in such a short time span?
So I hope throughout the presentation we've addressed sort of the drivers of the rate increases and what we're doing to manage those rate increases. And the math that is in there is a little bit different than my. I look at these numbers very closely, and I'll just say that maybe there's some differences in the arithmetic. But having said that, the reason is this major investment. I want to step back, and in 2016, we did a forecast of what and we presented this public, what we thought the cost would be for this Willamette water supply program when it's fully implemented at the district. And at that time, we were forecasting the cost to be over $105 per month. And right now, it looks like even with all the inflationary setbacks that we had from COVID and the supply chain issues and all those things that have really affected the program that Mr. Kraska talked about, it looks like we are going to be very close to that number. So I think that in a sense, we've had some wins. We've been able to do some things that saved money along the way. We've reacted to some of these unexpected conditions, these black swan events like the supply chain interruptions and the general inflation that occurred. And I think we're on target to largely land where we were with that forecast in 2016. I hope I answered your question. If not, as just indicated, we'll be around to try further to answer them if we didn't get the right answer out there.
So we've got one final comment from Daryl who says, thank you, nicely explained. See you at the public meetings. Well, thank you, Daryl, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. That's our last question in the chat and in the Q&A, and we don't see any hands raised. So with that, I'd like to remind folks the next chance to attend an open house on our rates will be this Saturday, August the 5th at 9 a.m. here at our headquarters in Beaverton, 1850 Southwest 170th Ave. All this information that is shared with you today will be transcribed onto YouTube and posted on our website at tvwd.org/rates. And I'll hand it over to our CEO, Tom, one more time for final remarks.
Thank you, Justin. And again, thank you to all that attended. We understand that nobody wants the rates to go up. And I really wish we could be delivering different news to you to say, wow, we don't have to increase rates nowhere near this amount, but unfortunately, we are dealing with the realities of these increased costs, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to fulfill our contractual obligations on the Willamette project. So that's the driver behind these. We will see once we get beyond this project, things really begin to ease and a chance to breathe. But the next few years between now and between the 2026, mid-2026, we're still in a bit of a fragile point. As we explained to our board and to the public, a couple of years ago, when we were more on the front edge of all the building of all this, what we had said is we were entering what we called the fiscal event horizon. And that meaning it's a bit like we knew we were going to be crossing over to a point of no return, and we have. It's scary for all of us, and we understand that, and we take our fiduciary responsibility to all of you very seriously. That is not something we take lightly. Each and every one of our staff members thinks about it. We all talk about it, and we all try to do our best to keep your costs contained. But we do have these drivers right now that we just don't have a lot of control over. So with that, I hope to see some of you Saturday. And if you think of additional questions, please feel free to send them in, ask. We're here. We're not hiding. And we understand if you have concerns about this. So we're here and ready to answer your questions. So thank you very much. And we'll see you again in a few days.